I'm so excited about this team of women, this team of moms, this smart and accomplished group who will be not just speaking for the president, which is Dana Perino had that post, Dee Dee Myers had that job, but really coming up with strategies for how to communicate with the whole country. Joe Biden has said he will be a president for all Americans, even the ones who didn't vote for him. And this team will be responsible, Aisha, for crafting those messages for the president and vice president. What do you think?
Well, I think this is fantastic. And I want to thank you, Nicole, for leading with resumes, because it is exciting that we have such a diverse cabinet thus far and appointees thus far. I love that it's a bunch of women who are going to be doing the communication strategy. But it's also important to remember that these are people who have a breadth and depth of experience. Ashley Etienne, who you just put up a picture of there, actually ran point for Nancy Pelosi on the Hill for many years as her lead communications person there. And she was the person who crafted all of the impeachment narrative and language. You've got a lot of people on the team who know what they're talking about and how to connect with voters, which is the thing that's really important. And yes, I do appreciate that there are a lot of moms. There are women from all walks of life who can connect with and empathize with what we all are going through and what the conversations we just had at Thanksgiving around the kitchen table. And so to be able to communicate in a way that is connected, humanizing, and full of life experience, I think is going to be really powerful for this administration.
And we didn't mention our friend Simone Sanders is also taking on a very senior role. You know, Yamiche, the first team that comes in has the job of not just figuring out how to work together and figuring out how to, they're going to have to be turning a lot of these functions back on. A press briefing that functions as an information and I don't know how to put this delicately, so I'll just be blunt. That doesn't function like a segment on Fox News in prime time when Kayleigh McEnany is off from her campaign gig that she seems to be multitasking with. This is going to be a team of communicators devoted to the job of communicating on behalf of a president and vice president who are doing the country's business. That has not been the job of any of the people that have had some of these titles for this team, this president, Donald Trump.
That's right. And this is going to be a team with all their life experience, with all their work experience, with all their diversity and their diversity of thought and racial diversity, as well as gender diversity in terms of their skill set. I think that what we see here is a group of women who are going to have to really build back the credibility of the White House. For years now, we've seen a press shop that was adversarial with reporters, that was really about at times lying to reporters, that was about misinformation and spreading disinformation at time. I think they're really going to have to come back and prove, I think in some ways, that this is the White House functions as a way of giving real information, accurate information to the American people. I think, of course, the relationship is still going to be tense. It's supposed to be tense between reporters and public figures and the White House. We're going to be asking tough questions. But I think that given the experience that these women have had, I'm thinking of Ashley and Simone, Karine, Kate, Jen, all of them are people that I've interacted with personally that are straight shooters, that have not been people who are giving you information that's not wrong. They might be people who don't want to give you information when you're asking, if I'm, of course, pushing for information that they don't want to give out. But there's not this feeling that we're going to be lied to. And I think that is possibly a really, really good thing going in because there is, of course, going to be still that tension with all sorts of hard questions coming their way.
You know, Yamiche, while you were talking, I remember when I was named White House Communications Director coming off the campaign and into the White House in 2005 in the transition, Elizabeth Buemiller, who's now the Washington bureau chief at the New York Times, wrote a piece, I think, and it said, White House aide aims to defrost the briefing room. And of course, I did not have that effect because a press operation usually takes on the personality of the principal. And one of the personalities of the Biden campaign was that it didn't leak. And I always had this pet theory that had something to do, the tone is always set on leaks at the top. And I always thought that had something to do with now President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris just not tolerating leaks. But what can you tell us, Yamiche, about sort of how they philosophically approach dealing with reporters like yourself?
Well, I can say that obviously reporters are going to be pushing for information, but I think given again my experience with most of these women, when I ask them a question, the answer is something that I feel like I can trust that their answer is accurate. That their answer might not always be forthcoming. There's going to be real questions about transparency and what we can find out, what we can't find out. Reporters are always going to be pushing to kind of get background information, off the record information. But that being said, I think when Jen takes the stage, takes the podium there's going to be this feeling that at least in the beginning, her word has been her bond, and that she will be able to start with the credibility that, say, Kayleigh McEnany, frankly, has eroded. I think there was this feeling when Kayleigh McEnany came in. You might remember in her first briefing, she said, "I will not lie to you." Of course, that has been really, really complicated because she has shared information from the podium that we know, in fact, not to be true. But I think there is this feeling when I think about these women, that they are coming in with this feeling that we can trust them, at least in the beginning. And I think that really is going to be a relationship that's going to have to be nurtured, because there is going to be this question about how much information are we going to get. There is this idea of leaking. Reporters are always going to be wanting to call everyone they can in the White House to try to get information. We have seen some of the names of the appointees come out before the official announcements. So it's going to be, I think, a little adversarial, but it's going to be, I think, respectful. And that to me is probably the underlying thing. There has been this real lack of respect, if I can be frank, between the reporters and the White House, with President Trump and his allies saying that they wanted to make the media the opposition party, making us the enemy of the people. And when the president himself is going after people and being nasty and being critical of reporters, it goes down the line, and you see that the relationship there is fractured. So I don't think Joe Biden is going to have that same tone with reporters, and as a result, you're not going to see, I think, these ladies have that same tone as well.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.